So this video is part of the series about the next 12-year cycle and how the increase in the release of spiritual light is going to affect Earth. And in this one, I'm going to give some more concrete prophecies about changes that are likely to happen. But you need to have watched the first two videos in order to really get the benefit of this one. So the purpose here is to describe the effect of this release of spiritual light. And I have described it some of the first two, but here we'll look at what effect will it have on specific aspects of life on Earth. And the first one we'll talk about is the effect on living organisms. So what you will see is that for many organisms, both human and animal, there will in the next 12 years be an increase in disease. This isn't a permanent condition, it's a temporary condition. It's like when you attempt to fast or cleanse your body, the body will bring up toxins that will give you various symptoms. And so what is going to happen is that as the light increases, it is going to flush out these impurities and it's going to manifest on a temporary basis as an increase in certain diseases. There will also be more erratic animal behavior that you will see in nature. There will also be some animal species that might become extinct or that will be reduced in numbers. And you will also see that there can be a temporary increase in, for example, parasites, poisonous animals and insects, but after some time this will go down. Now the effects of this, as I said in the other two videos, will depend on what people do with the light. Do they take the light? Do they use it to accelerate themselves and their own awareness? Or do they resist the light, resist raising awareness? So the effects can be more or less severe. There are clearly some animal species that you can see, poisonous animals, parasites, you can see this can't be a higher manifestation. This can't be a manifestation of a higher state of consciousness. So again, this will disappear eventually as the Earth is raised to higher levels. Some of the animal species that are there today will simply disappear because there is a correspondence between animal species and the level of the collective consciousness. This is something that many people will find it difficult to accept, but it's actually the case. And so you will see that, and you will probably also see that people will become more aware of this and how there are certain animal species that just aren't natural, you might say. Another area where there will be changes is in weather patterns. As the light is increased, again, the whole Earth body, so to speak, will go through a cleansing. And one effect of this is more erratic weather patterns for a time. There will be more storms, more hurricanes. There will more likely be these, areas that will get very dry, areas that will be very, very wet. And again, this is simply a result of this cleansing process that will happen. And again, if people respond positively to the light, it will be a period and then it will start fading. Otherwise, it can become more violent. And what really would be the optimum effect of this is that we human beings start learning a simple lesson, and that is that our state of mind affects many more things on Earth than we have been aware of. And what scientists are doing is they're always trying to reduce things to their basic level. So they are looking for a single cause. And what needs to happen in the next 12 years is that people begin to realize that things are so complex on Earth that you can't look at a single cause. Climate change, it's not that the ascended masters are denying climate change, but you can't say that everything that's going to happen in weather patterns is caused by climate change. There is not a single cause because everything is so connected, and everything is, our consciousness is connected to the planet. We are, so to speak, part of the whole energy system, and it's one connected whole. And therefore, our state of consciousness, our imbalanced state of consciousness, where we have basically exploited the earth instead of working with the earth, as for example many native peoples have talked about, we need to recognize that this does have an effect on the earth. And this is one positive outcome of the next 12 years. There could be more of an awareness of this. Then there is the earth itself. Again, the earth is one interconnected energy system. As the light is increased, the earth's body will cleanse, and under the, I've talked about above the surface you have weather patterns, under the surface you have earthquakes and volcanoes. And so the masters are actually saying there's likely to be more earthquakes and volcanoes in the next 12 years. In fact, you just saw here in the end of January, there was a great increase in earthquake activity in Greece, in one of the islands that had to be evacuated, and you're likely to see much more of this. But the Masters are also saying, the more people respond positively to the spiritual light, the less severe the earthquakes and the volcanic eruptions will be. If people don't respond, then they will be more severe, because you could say that what we need to recognize here is that our consciousness affects the energy system of the earth. And when our consciousness is unbalanced, it will create imbalances in the planet itself. And that when we balance our state of consciousness, we will moderate the imbalances in the earth. So another effect of the increase of spiritual light is that matter itself will actually begin to vibrate at a higher state. And the Masters have explained that the Earth was originally created as what they call a natural planet. And on a natural planet, matter isn't as dense as it is on Earth. And as the light is increased over the next 12 years, matter will begin to vibrate at a higher level. And one of the effects of this is that it's a tremendous opportunity for spiritual growth, because when matter vibrates at a higher level, it will be easier for people to realize, I'm not the physical body. I'm not a product of the physical body or the physical brain. I am not a material being. I'm actually a spiritual being. And it will be easier for people to recognize that the way you experience life, whether you have a positive life experience or not a positive life experience, does not depend on conditions outside yourself. It depends on your psychology. And therefore it'll be easier for people to make the shift that I've talked about in some of the other videos of looking at, we need to go beyond material welfare into psychological well-being, and that it needs to be the goal of society. And it also becomes easier for people to accept, for example, reincarnation, because when you start looking into your psychology and discover traumas that you can't explain by what happened to you in this lifetime, you become open to the idea that you could have lived before, and that therefore it's necessary to heal your psychology of these traumas from past lives. And this, of course, can have many, many positive effects, and even the effect that people begin to accept that, as many people already do, that your state of mind has a very direct effect on the physical conditions you encounter. And if that spreads to a planetary level, then it opens up for the possibility that people can begin to say, can we shift our consciousness and, for example, eradicate poverty? Can we shift our consciousness and eradicate war? Can we literally raise the collective consciousness to a point where war and poverty become obsolete? They become a thing of the past. They simply become impossible. Now, if more people can make use of this increase of the light to raise their awareness, there will also be an entirely new approach to healing of the physical body that becomes possible. Because when you recognize that you are not a product, your mind, your consciousness is not a product of the physical body, you open up for this recognition that you can't approach healing the physical body as a completely mechanical, physical, material thing. You need to look at the entire energy system of a human being, which involves both the physical body and the mind. And the mind has levels, like I've talked about in many videos, the emotional, mental, and the identity level. And it opens up the possibility that in order to really be effective, healing has to involve the psychology. Even the possibility that people can learn to use their minds to heal their bodies or to keep their bodies healthy. And so you will see that there's likely to be an increase in diseases over the next 12 years. And in societies where they cling to the materialistic approach to healing, they will be more and more unable to deal with this, to heal this. They will simply not be able to understand why this is happening. But in countries that can make a shift to a more holistic approach to healing, they will discover new ways to heal, new technologies even that are not there now. So there's plenty of room for new inventions in the healing field. There's also plenty of career opportunities for many spiritually minded people, alternative or holistic health practitioners, psychologists, all kinds of people in this field who can step in and help bring forth this new approach to healing and this new forms of technology. And so really what you will see is the emergence of a new type of healthcare practitioners that are not only educated in the physical body, but also in psychology. And this will also give new opportunities for psychologists if they can make this transition. Another area where there will be great changes is science and technology. As the light is increased, matter itself is raised in vibration. What's the effect of this? What is the effect of the current density of matter? It is that we are not able to discover the deeper aspects of how matter works. Partly because our understanding is too primitive, partly because matter simply forms a veil, an energy veil, that hides it from us. You look at science. There are scientists who are saying that physics has basically been treading water for 50 years. No major new discoveries, no major new theories have come forth. Well, if scientists are willing to make use of the opportunity that this increase in light provides, then it's likely that that stalemate is going to be broken over the next 12 years. New discoveries about the nature of matter, the most fundamental aspects of matter, can be made. But this requires a shift because we need to actually make use of the discoveries that have already been made, for example, Einstein's theory of relativity, which basically says physical matter is a form of energy that vibrates within a certain spectrum. And we need to recognize that there are other forms of energy beyond this spectrum. In other words, we need to realize first there are other forms of energy beyond what we today call the material spectrum. But we also need to recognize that the material, what we call the material world, is really a product of these higher forms of energy. So you can say that the material world, to give you a very simple illustration, is what's happening on a movie screen. And so far science has been investigating what's taking place on the movie screen, thinking that the cause is to be found at the level of the movie screen. But when if we make use of this increase in light, we can realize there are higher forms of energy, the projector, the movie projector, and that's where we need to find the cause. And when we do that, we will see new ways to deal with matter, new ways to discover technology, and one of the effects of this will be energy generation. And the Ascended Masters have for a long time been talking about the whole concept of free energy. And they are saying it's not actually free the way scientists describe it. The whole concept of free energy is really sort of a propaganda tool for the power elite who has a monopoly on energy today, and they want to keep that monopoly. Therefore, they want to ridicule any alternative. It's basically the same as if you imagined that there was a power elite that had control over steam energy, and they wanted to suppress the discovery of electricity. And so what the masters are saying is that energy is streaming from this higher level into the material spectrum. And there is technology that will allow us to make use of this, which means we don't have to burn fossil fuel to generate energy. It just flows, and we just take the natural flow. It's not exactly the same technology, but it's similar to solar power. I mean, we are not paying the sun to shine. We are not causing the sun to shine. So all you need to do is realize that there's a higher form of energy beyond the physical energy created by the sun, generated by the sun, that we can also learn to make use of. It doesn't mean that in the next 12 years it'll be entirely free energy, because there'll still be a need to use sustainable energy, wind, solar, and there'll still be a need to research fusion energy, for example. But it also means that there's possibility of some really breakthroughs in these forms of energy, so that we get to a point where we are not dependent on fossil fuels. But the shift that needs to happen in society is also, it ties in with the whole, what I talked about in the second video about the power elite. Because right now, who is it that's controlling energy production and energy distribution? Well, a small power elite that are making insane amounts of money by making the population dependent on this energy. And this monopoly has to be broken. And it will start to be broken in the next 12 years. And only if people make that transition, recognizing the power elite, deciding we don't want this power elite to rule our societies, only then will we be able to discover these higher forms of technology. And one aspect of this is energy distribution. I mean, the whole idea that we need, for example, this net of wires to distribute electricity, that will also be eventually be replaced by other forms of technology, so that energy can be distributed in different ways, or energy can be generated in local areas instead of these big central power plants. This is a little bit more long-term, but it's definitely a possibility that this shift will begin in the next 12 years. And it's also possible that people will come to accept that there are higher forms of energy and that we can learn to use them, but that we cannot allow a small elite to monopolize this or to stop this development because they want to maintain their monopolies on energy. Another revolution in science that can at least begin in the next 12 years is this full recognition of what we've actually already discovered, namely the connection between matter and energy. Theory of relativity, quantum physics have begun to realize this, but science has been stopped by the materialistic paradigm, that we absolutely have to find the cause of everything within the material world. And as the light is increased, it will become easier for people, easier for scientists to start questioning this materialistic paradigm. Now, some scientists have already started doing it, but this can become like a snowball effect, becomes more and more mainstream, more and more accepted. And this can mean that people, scientists will begin to make new discoveries, new theories can come up, and this can open up, of course, for new technology. And it's can have many, many subtle ramifications in society, but it can lead to, among other things, this recognition that if matter is really energy, it might be possible to change matter through energy, through vibration. In other words, the ancient alchemists dreamt about turning lead into gold through some chemical component, philosopher's stone or whatever they dreamt about. But really the key to this is vibration. Once you realize that everything is energy that vibrates, why shouldn't it be possible to use an energy ray to change the molecular structure of one form of matter into another form of matter? I'm not saying that in the next 12 years scientists will be able to take dirt and change it into gold, but they can at least begin to realize that it is possible. Matter is much more pliable, and it can be possible to change different forms of matter. And then, of course, you could say, why is this necessary? Why is this beneficial? Well, what's the main cause of poverty right now? Everybody's saying there's not enough natural resources. But what if natural resources could be taken to a whole new level, where you realize, as I said with energy, there's actually unlimited energy in a higher realm. And if some of that energy can be converted into forms of matter, are there really limited natural resources on Earth? Would it be possible to eradicate poverty within a reasonable time frame? So these are some of the questions that more and more people will begin to tune into. More and more people will begin to openly ask these questions and consider this, and this can open up for discovery of new forms of technology. As a result of this increase of light, it will become easier for people to, we might say, revolutionize the way we look at matter. Right now, science is very much trapped in this materialistic paradigm. But some scientists have started questioning it, and there are scientists who have started actually saying we need to question the materialistic paradigm that says first there was matter, and then when a random evolutionary process had developed a brain that was sophisticated enough, then came consciousness. Instead, they are beginning to say, what if consciousness came before matter? What if consciousness is a fundamental feature of the universe? That there would be no universe without consciousness. What exactly does that mean? And as I said, there are scientists, credible scientists, who already started asking these questions, but this is what can become much more common in the next 12 years, both among scientists, but also among the general population, where people become willing to consider this and what that really means. And of course, the spiritual people, again, have an incredible opportunity to be forerunners for this shift. Now, there are many ramifications of this, of course. As I've said in a previous talk, the shift from material welfare to psychological well-being really requires us to recognize that consciousness is really a fundamental feature of the universe, and that the purpose of human existence is really our consciousness, not our material conditions. But another thing that can happen as a result of this that the Ascended Masters are talking about is that so far our technology has been force-based. You are forcing nature. You are trying to force the universe. And you can take as an example the steam engine. You have to build a boiler that's strong enough that it can handle pressure from within. You put water in the boiler. You put fire underneath with coal that has been forcefully mined out of the earth. It's burned. It heats up the water. This creates steam, and the pressure of the steam can then be converted into mechanical work. And obviously, this is force. Force, force, force. Not non-force-based technology, like, for example, solar panels. You're making use of the sun's energy is not force-based. You're not forcing the sun to shine. So what the masters have been saying is that there's an entire area of technology that is not force-based. But in order for scientists to discover it, two conditions must be fulfilled. Number one, we have to abandon the materialistic paradigm and recognize that consciousness is a fundamental quality of the universe. Number two, we have to expose the power elite, because force-based technology is mechanical in nature. Therefore, it can be controlled, no matter what your level of consciousness is. Simplest example, a gun is a purely mechanical force-based technology. You can have people with the lowest state of consciousness, the most evil, selfish, self-centered people, can operate a gun and shoot others. Doesn't require any higher level of consciousness. So non-force-based technology is not like that. It requires a certain level of consciousness in order to be discovered, in order to work. And that's why there needs to be a complete paradigm shift in how we approach life. Because first of all, the power elite won't be able to discover this technology, but they will not be able to monopolize it either. And this requires that the people come to a point where they will not allow the power elite to block the development and discovery of this technology. Just imagine if oil became obsolete. How many of these power elite people are dependent on oil for their income, for their control of the people? Look how oil controls society. How many ramifications that has. And so that requires a major shift, and therefore you can see that all of these countries that are depending on oil, they will do whatever they can to prevent the discovery of a technology that could make oil obsolete. They'll try to prevent people from accepting that it's even possible to have this technology. So that's why there needs to be these shifts. And again, spiritual people can help bring about this shift, but scientists also need to be willing to think in new terms, because basically what you realize here is very, very simple. I've talked in many of my videos that most people on Earth have gone into this state of the duality consciousness, where there's always the two opposite polarities. We are right, those other people are wrong. We are God's chosen people, we have a right to kill those other people who live on the land that we want. And many other examples of this. So this mindset is what keeps us, humanity, at a certain level of consciousness, where the only way we can see to get resources is to force nature to give it to us. We force oil out of the ground. Oil was, by the way, generated by force. Ancient organisms were put under pressure that developed oil, but we are now using force to extract it. We are using force to make use of it in a gasoline engine. There's explosions in the cylinders and this and that. But everything is force. And the alternative is non-force-based technology, where we don't have to force nature to give us what we need. But it also requires us to transcend the force-based mindset, where we are willing to exploit other people or force them. And this is, as I said in my last talk, the power elite that are the main proponents of this force-based mindset. And you can look at it and you can say, is it likely that the power elite people are ever going to overcome this force-based mindset? Well, certainly not in the short term. So what is going to bring a change? It is the majority of the people get out of this force-based mindset. Incidentally, what's the main tool we have been given for getting out of the force-based mindset? It's the golden rule. Don't force others if you don't want others to force you. And you can say, well, many people are Christians and they believe in the golden rule. But do they really believe that they don't have a right to force others to live their lives the way they think they should live their lives? You see how subtle this force-based mindset is? You can't allow yourself to think that other people should live according to your religious values. That's force-based. So again, many, many shifts, and the most aware people, the most spiritual people are the ones who have the best chance of embracing this shift and therefore helping to spread it in the collective consciousness. Because again, this is one of those also realizations that can come in the next 12 years. How have changes happened in society? There's a power elite that wants to hold back changes. Then there's a creative elite that wants to bring changes, and by them accepting new ideas, it gradually spreads into the collective consciousness. More and more people begin to accept it. Democracy. It was not the power elite that wanted democracy. They did everything they could to resist democracy. But a small creative elite started talking about it, writing about it, and gradually spread until there was this shift where a majority of people said, yeah, why should we allow these feudal lords to turn us into slaves? Why shouldn't we be free? Why shouldn't we have greater freedom? Why shouldn't we have a society that recognizes we have rights that the power elite cannot take away from us? So I have already talked about free energy, but I want to revisit it because just imagine what would happen to society if energy was free. We have electricity now. There could be other forms of energy that will replace electricity, but just look at electricity. Imagine that electricity didn't cost money. For example, let's say you had a little box that you could put in your house. You could hook up to your electrical wires in the house. And this box produced electricity, but you didn't have to put any fuel in it. It was, as I said, a higher form of energy filtered into the material frequency spectrum and turned into electricity. So all of a sudden, it didn't cost you money to have the lights on in your house. Why would you need oil to heat your house? Just have electrical heaters. It doesn't cost you anything. So just imagine the immense changes that could happen in society if energy was free. Just look at a country like India. India has started to lift a lot of people out of poverty, but there are still thousands of villages in India where they don't have electricity. Just imagine that all of these villages had electricity and it didn't cost them anything. You see how quickly a country could lift all of its people out of poverty by this kind of technology. So again, you have to ask the question, why don't we have this kind of technology? Well, it's partly the force-based mindset, but where does the force-based mindset come from? From the power elite. Because they don't want to lift the majority of the people out of poverty, because they want the majority of the people to be workers who have to work to create privileges and riches for the elite. So when this shifts, just imagine what could happen. It's like you could look back in the rich nations of the world. You could look back 100 years. I grew up in Denmark. I look back at my grandparents and how poor they were. It's unthinkable today. Most people are so much better off. But just imagine that all of the poor countries in the world, Africa, India, South America, that all people there were lifted up to the same standard we have in the affluent part of the world. And I know what people are going to say right away. There isn't enough natural resources. Perfectly true. With the current availability of natural resources and with the current availability of energy and the cost of energy. Perfectly correct. But if, as I've explained here, we could have free energy and we could have a whole different approach to natural resources, why shouldn't it be possible to lift people out of poverty? But this requires a shift in our awareness and our ability to accept that there could be a much better way to live than what we see right now. And that requires us to let go of the force-based mindset, the materialistic mindset, and the idea that we, the people, need a power elite to rule us. And that is what there's a tremendous opportunity to question over the next 12 years. And those who will resist it, as I said, the power elite, they will have to become more and more extreme in order to avoid this breakthrough that can happen. So just a final thought on this. When you look at people today, you can say, are there people that are resisting progress? And you will have to say, even today, but also if you look back at history, there's always been people who resisted progress. And I've said some of the easy to identify people are the power elite. Because at any time in history, there's an established power elite who has great power, great privileges, and they don't want to lose it. You go back to the feudal societies of Europe, where the noblemen owned the land. and they owned the peasants who worked the land. So they could sit in their castles, eat, drink, and be merry because the peasants did all the work. And they didn't want to change that. They didn't want democracy, for example. They didn't want the Industrial Revolution. So what has happened when you look at this in history, you see that there's always an established power elite. They resist change because they want to maintain their privileges. And then from time to time, there's an aspiring power elite that comes up. They want to overthrow the established elite. And often they claim that they want to free the people, but they don't. They just want to use the people to get rid of the established power elite so they can set themselves up in a privileged position. And what needs to happen, and what will happen more and more in the next 12 years, is that people become aware of this dynamic. They become aware that there was an established elite that resisted democracy. Then there was an aspiring elite who promoted democracy, but it was because it gave them an opportunity to become the early capitalists who set themselves up as the owners of companies. Instead of owning land, you now own companies. And this became what we saw in the 1800s, for example, very clearly in the United States, these monopoly capitalists. Rockefeller, Morgan, some other of these families. So what we see is that even after democracy was created, there was the emergence of a power elite within democracy that was attempting to use the democratic freedoms and the economic freedoms of unrestricted capitalism to set themselves up as the new power elite, who had not quite as much control over the people because there was still democracy, people could vote, but they still had enormous control over the financial industry. And what has happened since then is that this financial power elite, they have attempted to attain more and more control. In the United States, there's a think tank called the Rand Corporation, who a few years ago came up with a report about income inequality. And they showed how over the past 40 years, the wealth of the middle class had been systematically eroded because money had been funneled upwards towards the top 2% of the population. And so you still have this old established power elite that are sitting on the money and the financial industry. But now what you're seeing is there's an aspiring power elite that's coming up, the tech billionaires, who are attempting to replace the old power elite so they can take over. And what people need to see is simply this. Progress is not really made by getting rid of the old power elite and replacing it with an aspiring power elite. What we need to do is become aware of this dynamic, that there's always people who will try to set themselves up as a power elite, and we need to say, why do we need societies like this? Why do we need societies dominated by a power elite? Again, as I said in my previous talk, you look at most of the atrocities that have happened on Earth, they were initiated by a power elite. So, do you really think that the general population could do worse than the power elite has been doing for centuries? Do you really think that if the population, most people, live by the golden rule, do you really think that that would be worse to have the general population decide rather than to have a small power elite who doesn't respect the golden rule, doesn't respect the population, only think about themselves? So wouldn't it be possible to create a society that would function better without the power elite than our current societies are functioning with the power elite? So this is another set of questions that need to be asked, and another awareness that has the potential to dawn in the next 12 years. And again, very simple. If a majority of people shift and recognize this, there can be a smooth transition into a better age. If that doesn't happen, then the power elite will have to act out in more and more extreme ways, and it will create more chaos, more conflict, more threats, more poverty. So it's simply a matter of, what do we want as human beings? What kind of a society do we want? What kind of leaders do we want? And what really is the conclusion we need to reach here is that this descent of light that the Ascended Masters have decided to release, this marks a point of no return. Status quo cannot be maintained. The current societies ruled by a power elite, they're not sustainable. They cannot be sustained over the next 12 years. They will break down. The only question is, how much chaos and conflict will it take to break them down? Or could there be an entirely smooth transition because the most aware people, the creative elite, the most spiritual people, they are willing to embrace these changes. They are willing to make use of this opportunity that the light gives to shift their awareness into a positive state, and also a willingness to take responsibility for our societies and really work towards a better society. A society that's based on higher awareness rather than the current state of a lower awareness, a self-centered, force-based state of awareness.